Hey, sir, do your parents know you're out here playing war? You stared blankly back at the overweight civilian drone operator who smiled at you through a gangly beard. A room full of Marines, soldiers, and civilians ostensibly conducting modern war seemed to focus all energy on your response. You stood on a raised platform in the rear of the room, facing the jeering faces ahead turned back to you. Yes, they do, and they are very proud. The drone operator took a sip of his O'Doul's as he turned to sit down 2 rows ahead of you, the response seeming to stymie any more laughs from the room. So the room's attention returned to the maps and the live feeds of Western Iraq displayed prominently on the wall forward. As you sat down, your radio operator to your right leaned over. A young, talented, junior enlisted Marine, Paul Kidder had sat next to you every day for nearly 5 months of deployment. "That's cute, sir. Are you proud of me?" he said. "Yes, Kidder, I am. Now then my dad is proud of me too." Kidder paused, waiting for you to respond as he stood with his chin on his fist and stared up towards the ceiling. You shook your head and returned to your keyboard and computer. In memory more than the moment, your computer and the screens ahead broadcasting life and death began to represent what you know as modern war. The Iraqis fought and died warring against ISIS only a few miles away. You sat with your team, removed in support, in relative safety and with functioning air conditioning. You had to remind yourself it was real the first time you saw a truck explode on one of those screens. A missile from an unmanned aircraft had made quick work of 3 ISIS fighters in a pickup truck careening through the desert. You were brand new to the command center then and still days away from starting your first shift as the junior officer in charge of the room. You would learn that your job would include facilitating strikes exactly like that one and reporting the kill count in daily briefs. When you got home 7 months later and watched the new Star Wars movie with a friend, you had to tell yourself to stop counting the deaths in exploding ships. You had to remind yourself it wasn't real. You shook that night with each fantastical explosion that killed incomprehensible numbers when compared to modern war, hoping your friend wouldn't notice and hiding for the first time a shame of moral injury you did not quite fully understand. But how could you? You were 25 and baby-faced to be called out for looking too young to be at war. You were trained to shoulder the burden of your Marines, whether physical, mental, or moral. But what do you do after you shoulder your Marines' moral burden? And how do you shoulder a moral burden that belongs to you? When home, years later, you would say you were lucky to have the experience of making life and death decisions so young. Facilitating kinetic strikes against ISIS were decisions of death. These decisions grew more difficult to live with when back home in the civilian world and killing again became illegal. Supporting casualty evacuations to the battlefield were decisions of life. Enabling the treatment of a wounded Iraqi changed the climate of the command center from a group of stadium spectators cheering on a gladiator to a stressed family in a living room, awaiting the call from a doctor. These moments would be most impactful to you and serve as the clearest markers of doing good in the face of the jarring reality of war. Especially the moment from one night when the base medical center ran out of blood. The day had begun as many had before, supporting an Iraqi operation aimed at liberating one of the last ISIS bastions on the Euphrates River. The Iraqis had met resistance and took several casualties, some of whom were wounded badly enough to be transferred for treatment on your base. As the day ended, the Iraqis transitioned to defensive operations for the night. You then started to hear the muffled sounds of words coming from the Iraqi radio behind you. The only word you understood was Jahal, or child. "Brother, come here," Hamza said, and you stand up immediately to talk to your Iraqi interpreter and his liaison next to him. A young boy stepped on an IED near the river. "Can we treat him?" he asked, firm but caring in his delivery. You glanced over at Hamza and the interpreter to his left. The Iraqi liaison officer was still on the radio, yet staring steadily at you. "Yes, we'll make it happen. I'll call the med center." Your shift was ending, but you stayed through to see the boy transferred onto base and into the medical center. Chet, your replacement, never seemed to mind when you stayed late into his shift. It also kept you away from all the calls and texts which were altogether unhelpful to you in your time off. Before you were to leave, the med center called to say they were running out of blood. And this event, too, was routine. You walked back behind the Iraqi radio to talk to the contractor in charge of the base defense loudspeakers. Blood drive activated! Be positive! Be positive! The loudspeakers that pumped the announcement across the remote Iraqi base always seemed slightly too loud for your command center where the call originated. In a break between repetitions, you asked Chet if he was willing to take over shift. Yeah, I am, thanks. You going to donate? He asked. No, I'm A positive. The day ended with more casualties on the enemy side than the friendly, which gave you some comfort as you donned your gear to leave. It was, however, just one operation of many, and the days that following would add to the blur of enemies defeated and friendly casualties treated. This last casualty stuck out because he was a boy, a non-combatant away from the front lines who arrived at the base out of the sheer misfortune and circumstance of living in a war zone where bombs still lay blatant in the sand. Walking out into the night, you adjusted to the winter chill and near complete darkness of the vast desert. As you passed the medical center, you saw a queue of people had already formed waiting to donate. You paused, staring at the people who formed out of the near complete darkness of the night to support a nameless Iraqi. You were proud to be with those people supporting the Iraqis in their war, and you went to bed feeling like you were part of something worthwhile and meaningful. You woke up several hours later and returned to the command center. You asked for details about the boy and heard that he had died in the night. You hid any reaction and got to work.